Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. Before we get started, let me remind you that Simon is very passionate in this story. He's a 10-year-old boy, 10 or 11, and he's very, very passionate about rabbits. And he and his brother got about 3 rabbits and a hutch before their next-door neighbour did, who was a boy called Boris. And Boris had 20 rabbits, and they felt very outdone by him. And, of course, they have a very strict mother called Janice Miller, who refuses to buy them any more rabbits. So Simon has decided to pinch a couple of rabbits from Boris. And so we're about to find out about this little trip into the woods in the middle of the night to steal a couple of rabbits. What happens to the boys? Well, we're about to find out. But before we continue with the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's continue with part 2 of our story tonight. But Nina, if you love your husband as much as I believe you do, don't you think it would help him to lose some weight? Said Janice as tactfully as she could. Your brother Ivan's absolutely right, you know. Louis is obese, and that's got to be extremely worrying for you. I mean, what if he's not around anymore to see his grandchildren? And if he carries on that way, well, that's a very big possibility, because obesity kills so many people every year. And I'm sorry to say this, Nina, but your slow metabolism story just does not wash with me. It's the oldest excuse in the book that so many obese people use. If you don't mind my saying, Nina, and we've been friends for so long, I'm going to be perfectly blunt with you about this. But your son Boris appears to be going in exactly the same direction as his father. I know you might take offence to this, but you know, he's not eating healthy. And he doesn't play any sport. He's bullied at school, from what my sons tell me. And you appear to give in to his every whim. I know you love your son very much as I love mine. But sometimes when you love someone, you have to be firm with them. You have to learn to say no, no matter how hard it may be. I think if Boris was slim like my sons are, he'd be so much happier with his life. His weight is holding him back, you know, Nina, preventing him from being an active kid and all that he would like to be. And in my book, that is so very sad. I've never thought of it like that, said Nina. You're right. Boris is missing out on an awful lot. And I know he's not happy about being bullied all the time at school. He despises being so fat. He hates his body, you know. I see that sorrowful look on his face when he looks in the mirror at himself. But I always try to tell him how handsome he is, to make him feel better, of course. But he's not happy, Nina, as I've been telling you for a long time. Boris could be handsome if he lost weight, very handsome, I'm most sure. You need to say no to him, Nina. I know it's hard, but you want the best for your son, don't you? I do, Nina van Rensburg agreed, tears trickling down her cheeks, which she quickly wiped away. I really do, Janice. Janice Miller really liked Nina van Rensburg. Over the years they had become the best of friends, but she knew that her friend was her husband's and son's enabler, and she wished Nina could understand the health ramifications of what she was doing to her family's health. Nina looked reflectful for a moment, and somewhat sorrowful. You know, Janice, how can I say this? But Boris can't help the fact that he's got a big appetite like his father. I don't want to starve him at his young age. When he's hungry, he needs to eat because he's still growing. Oh, I do think it is a slow metabolism, whatever you might say. And you're right, the kids at school do tease him about his weight. But none of it is his fault, and it makes me mad when kids are so cruel. But you're right, I should say no more often, but it's hard to refuse my son. I imagine he'd have a tantrum if I say no to him about anything. I mean, Boris is addicted to Boston cream pie and tapioca pudding. And he's very keen on pizzas, burgers and fries, like most kids are. How can I possibly deprive him of all those things he loves so much? Janice Miller knew that it was unlikely that Nina van Rensburg would ever take any responsibility for overindulging her husband and son. But if she carried on in the way that she was, she'd probably kill the people she loved best in the world with her kindness. But at least Nina was starting to see that overindulging her husband and son was actually abusive to their health, and that their health was indeed declining. And if she could say no occasionally, things would dramatically improve in the van Rensburg household. But Janice doubted that Nina had it in her to take a tough stance as far as her husband and son were concerned. Simon would have loved a mother as easy to manipulate as Mrs. van Rensburg. How Simon wished with all his heart that his mother Janice would run around him and feed him up with Boston cream pies and tapioca pudding. But his mother would never do that, as she barely allowed her children to even enjoy any sugar, and the only time that James and Simon got anything sweet was when they were at the van Rensburg house, where Nina would give them so many delicious candies and cakes to enjoy, that if their mother knew anything about, she'd likely have a heart attack on the very spot. So the Miller boys were not forthcoming to their mother about how generous Nina van Rensburg was towards them when they went over to Boris's house for tea. Simon had once complained bitterly to his mother that she didn't fuss over them enough, like Mrs. van Rensburg fussed over Boris, and he told her in a whiny voice that it wasn't fair. "Listen to yourself, Simon. You do sound very whiny. As far as I'm concerned, you should thank your lucky stars that I'm not like Nina van Rensburg. Look at what a spoiled brat Boris is turning into. One day when he goes out into the big wide world, let me tell you, he's going to have a very rude awakening when he realizes that other people aren't going to fold under his indulgent demands, like his mother so obviously does. Much as I love my good friend Nina, I don't approve of the way she's raising her son. The problem with spoiled children is that when they go into the world later in life, it's like a roller coaster ride for them, because they've never learnt the toughness of life, so they have no resilience whatsoever. So when someone in a business deal says no to them, they'll probably go into a corner and sulk, whereas someone who's used to being tough will find another way to negotiate and won't crumble at the first hurdle. Once Simon overheard his mother talking about Boris to his father, and he had eavesdropped on their conversation. His ears had been flapping that day. "You know, Nina is such a good friend of mine, and I enjoy her company so much, I really do. But there are many things we both disagree on. The problem with Nina is she loves Boris to death, refuses that boy nothing, and there will come a time when it will come back to bite her, let me tell you. The trouble is she's killing that boy by overfeeding him, and he gets zero exercise. It's tragic, that's what it is." Tragic, Simon had privately thought to himself after overhearing his parents talking together. The trouble was his mother didn't know the meaning of the word tragic. Tragic was being denied all the things your friends at school had that you did not. Janice Miller hated excessive extravagances, and she often commented that the other mothers at the local school indulged their children far too much. But she believed the worst offender of them all was, of course, her good friend Nina van Rensburg, who appeared to find the word no alien to her vocabulary. Sometimes Simon wondered what it would be like to trade places with Boris for a week or so, and to wear Boris's shoes. The kids could swap mothers for a week. He had smiled to himself at this thought, and imagined his mother ordering Boris around in their home, denying him any sugary treats. There would be no more Boston cream pies or tapioca pudding for sure. Janice Miller would make him go on a strict diet at once and tell him to clean up his bedroom, and she'd probably enroll him in a gym membership almost immediately. By contrast, he could see himself seated on Boris's bed in the van Rensburg house on a Sunday morning, and having Nina van Rensburg dutifully bringing him big bowls of Tom and Jerry ice cream to eat for breakfast, as that was Simon's idea of heaven, as that is what he would definitely have asked for, if his life, like Boris, had been dappled with the gracious gift of excessive privilege. He imagined it would have been cool having a mother like Nina van Rensburg, but he'd rather keep his own father, as Atlas Miller was one of a kind. He had a great personality, was easygoing and carefree, and quite a demure, outdoorsy person, who had a very good relationship with both of his boys, and would regularly take them fishing and hiking. Louis van Rensburg, on the other hand, had never engaged in those outdoorsy pursuits with his son, as he was physically incapable of doing very much these days. The man was larger than life itself, with a cantankerous, sloth-like demeanour that could not have been great to live with, especially as he was inclined to be moody, and as Nina van Rensburg would say, he was often as snappy as a turtle. Simon had privately wondered how someone as kind as Mrs. van Rensburg could put up with such a disagreeable man like Louis, but some people said love was blind, and it was certainly that way for Nina, because she appeared to see Louis through rose-coloured spectacles, even when he was being downright disagreeable. It didn't take long for the door of the rabbit hutch to finally open. With his torch in his hands, Simon was searching for the rabbit he wanted. It was a particularly attractive rabbit, with very distinctive brown and black markings. It was cuddly, with a most affectionate nature, and from the moment Simon had laid eyes on it, he had fallen for it hard, and wondered how he could ever get to own such a rabbit, until he'd come up with his ingenious plan. He had decided to call his new rabbit Cottontail, as the rabbit had a white fluffy tail that rather reminded Simon of a fluffy cotton wool ball. It would seem that, like so many things in Boris's unremarkable life, he had been too lazy to name any of his rabbits. So how much did he even actually care for any of them? If Boris really did love his rabbits, why didn't he name them? He didn't bother to look after the hutch or feed them. Those chores were left to his mother, who took care of almost everything for her son. The only thing he bothered to do was let them run wild around the yard every afternoon for a short while, which he did religiously every single day. As far as Simon was concerned, every animal deserved to have a name, and he knew that he and his brother James would give Cottontail a much better life than Boris ever could. He would give the rabbit the kind of love that Boris knew absolutely nothing about, for the only person Boris appeared to love was himself. "I've got Cottontail," he said, picking up the sizable rabbit in his hands and running a hand down the rabbit's fluffy coat. "This is the one I really, really want. Won't you grab the grey and white one over there for me, James? I've had my eye on that one as well. It's got the sweetest disposition. I'm going to call him Flopsy Mopsy." Simon placed the two rabbits in the cat container that he'd brought along with them, that their mother used for their two cats when they took them to the vet's office for their annual vaccinations, which the cats hated. The two rabbits were both happily contained in the cat box, and didn't seem remotely phrased or bothered that they were being smuggled away, and were happily munching away at the sweet romaine lettuce and grated apple that Simon had put in the cat container, especially for them to enjoy. Simon bent down to re-engage the lock to the rabbit's hutch, and it snapped together very quickly. The 18 remaining rabbits, having been disturbed by the two boys, had suddenly become quite active, and were hopping around the hutch quite happily. Everything around them on this tenebrific night seemed disturbingly still, apart from the sounds of the rabbits tucking into their food. The Van Rensburg house was bathed in an uncongenial darkness, as the moonlight was cloaked by a swirl of dense cloud cover. There were only 2 outside lights left on, and their subtle illumination never so much as trespassed over this part of the backyard. So the 2 Miller boys didn't feel conspicuous, as the dark for the time being, while they didn't want to be seen, had become more like a friend for them than a foe. James realized that while they'd been fussing around the hutch, after they had successfully kidnapped a couple of Boris's rabbits, that something was profoundly off, almost as if the night itself was holding its breath, like the closed curtain in the theatre, that is waiting to open in any given second and reveal what lies behind it. James had a profound sense that something was going on, but he didn't know what it was, and that something might potentially happen on this night that was seriously going to make him regret having agreed to get involved in this foolish rabbit abduction scheme in the first place. But regret was not something he could engage in right now. There was plenty of time for that later on. He and his brother needed to make haste and leave the Van Rensburg backyard as quickly as possible, along with their 2 prized ill-gotten gains. Simon seemed to be procrastinating, as if he was still harbouring some festering doubts about what they'd just done. All James could think about was, "Let's get out of here now!" And he was about to nudge his brother when a sense of foreboding suddenly overcame him. He realised to his horror that the sounds of crickets and frogs had become completely mute, which confirmed to him that something wasn't right. Everyone knew that the woods lost its voice and the crickets failed to sing when something consequential had rudely disturbed the serenity. But what had caused the unsettling disturbance? Well, it was anybody's guess. It could, of course, be something completely benign, but it felt for both Simon and James that the tall, lofty trees in the wood road had quite suddenly become almost hostile and vengeful towards them, as if the trees themselves were conspiring against them, whispering mean things about the Miller boys among themselves. In that profound moment, both boys were overcome with a sense of grave disquiet. Something felt decidedly off tonight, but neither James or Simon knew what that incongruous, irrational feeling was, or where it came from. Perhaps it was the guilt that they felt in doing something they knew was intrinsically not right. All of a sudden, a light in the Van Rensburg house went on the top floor, and they could see a dark, very sizable, shadowy silhouette standing in the window, taking up the entire square of the window pane. James and Simon were in no doubt that that figure had to be Mr. Van Rensburg. He was looking out on the lawn, almost as if he'd been alerted to their presence. A very invasive bright torchlight from the upper floor was suddenly being flooded all over the lawn, as Mr. Van Rensburg was obviously using his obtrusive torch from the upper window to watch over the lawn. But why had Mr. Van Rensburg woken up like this? For as far as James and Simon were concerned, they had not made any noise at all. They had made absolutely sure that they had been as quiet as church mice as they sneaked on to the Van Rensburg property to the rabbit hutch. So what had roused Louis Van Rensburg from his peaceful slumber? "Get down!" whispered Simon urgently, tugging at his brother's shirt, so that James instinctively dropped to the ground. "Don't let Mr. Van Rensburg see you, or we're in big, big trouble." The 2 boys crouched behind the rabbit hutch and cowered, so they became one with it. For a moment the torchlight cast its bright beam around the rabbit hutch and hovered for a while, as if searching for something that the night was hiding in its shadows. Simon was terrified that Mr. Van Rensburg would see them, crouching over behind the hutch, making themselves as small as they possibly could to avoid detection. He could barely entertain the horrifying thought of burly Mr. Louis Van Rensburg and his huge, indignant body, heaving himself out of the house, like a giant, very bad-tempered walrus that was somewhat impeded by his great blubber, but still absolutely determined to purge out the secret that was hiding in his midst. Frankly, as far as Simon and James were concerned, it was a surprise that Louis Van Rensburg had even been disturbed during the night like this. How could he even know that something was out on his property, when the 2 Miller boys had prided themselves in making absolutely no noise? Maybe some men had a sixth sense about such things, and went to bed with one eye half open, for perhaps it was ingrained in their psyche to be the protector of the family. And with Louis Van Rensburg and his wrestling history behind him, maybe he was more tuned in to defending his family than most men in his position would be, as Mrs. Van Rensburg had always boasted that her husband was literally born to fight. "Don't move, James," whispered Simon to his brother. "We need to stay low for a while, until the coast is clear. Mr. Van Rensburg is up and about, so we need to be vigilant and make sure he doesn't see us." But what if he does see us? Whispered James. I knew we shouldn't have done this. I know he's going to find us. I know it. He's not going to find us, said Simon. But he will if you keep talking. Be quiet, James, and stay as small as you possibly can. We can't afford to let him see us. Moments later, lights on the lower floors of the Van Rensburg house came on, and Simon's heart at this point was jumping around so loudly in his ears that all he became conscious of was the rapid rise and fall of his chest, and the dreadful certainty that he and his brother would be caught. If Louis Van Rensburg caught them at the rabbit hutch, with two of the family rabbits in their cat box, they would never hear the end of it from their mother, who would probably come down on them so hard, and they would not be given any pocket money for an entire year, because Janice Miller could be as tough as old boots. She'd lightly ply them with even more laborious chores to do around the house, lecturing them intently that she didn't raise them up to become thieves. She'd lightly rant on and on about how humiliated and ashamed she was of their behaviour. Simon knew his mother could easily be provoked to anger if she was upset enough about something. Doubtlessly she would lay into him a lot harder than she would James. As him being the oldest, his head always tended to be on the chopping block first. She'd lightly say that Simon was a very bad influence on James, and maybe she was right, as James had not wanted to be involved in this Machiavellian plot in the first place. Soon they heard the bright red front door, with its gold impressive lion opulent knocker open, and a light being switched on. The light of Mr. Van Rensburg's prying torch once again circumnavigated the back and front yard, as the oversized man waddled precariously around his property, calling out, "Is anyone there?" in his booming voice. Simon was certain that both he and his brother James would be discovered, but luckily for them, Mr. Van Rensburg's ungainly, rather cumbersome body sabotaged his ability to properly investigate his property. He was heaving and wheezing from the slight exercise. Moments later they heard Mrs. Van Rensburg's voice. "What are you doing out there, Louis? Go back to bed, will you? Do you have any idea how late it is?" "I don't want you to wake up Boris. He needs his sleep, and he doesn't need his father waking him up in the middle of the night like this. You made such a commotion going downstairs. I'm very surprised you didn't wake our boy up." "I thought I heard some strange noises," came Mr. Van Rensburg's booming voice, that stole the silence in the yard with its baritone-like vigour. "But of course you heard noises," came Mrs. Van Rensburg's voice. "There are lots of owls hooting out here tonight. I heard them myself while I was in bed, but it's nothing to concern yourself with." "You heard them too, did you?" asked Mr. Van Rensburg. "They didn't sound natural, love. It was like some kind of cryptic code to me, as if people were out there hooting to each other, mimicking owl calls." "Those were owl hoots, for goodness sake." "Honestly, what are you like, Louis? Those were owl hoots, for goodness sake. There was nothing sinister about them at all. Now come back to bed, will you? Your insomnia is driving me crazy. It's not doing you any favours. We really need to discuss this problem with Dr. Lambrose. He was saying your weight is the big issue here. If you lost just a few pounds, Louis, maybe you would sleep a lot easier at night. Remember what Dr. Lambrose told you on our last visit. He said stop eating all those snacks between meals. He was blaming me for being your enabler, but I've stopped giving you snacks. I'm going to come clean with you, Louis. I discovered all those empty packets of Cheetos in your trunk. There were over 130 empty packets, crumbs all over the front seat, along with packages from Wendy's, Taco Bell, McDonald's, and God knows where else. You're overdoing it, love. You've got to stop. This can't go on." "Are you going to go on and on about my weight again, Nina? Change the record, will you? I'm a big guy. I eat a lot. Get over it, will you?" "You've never been this big, love. You ate a lot when you were professionally wrestling. But Dr. Lambrose isn't buying the fact that you've got a slow metabolism And come to think of it, neither am I. Not any more. I'm sorry, love. But I worry about you. This insomnia you're suffering from is doing you no favours. Maybe you need to go to the sleep specialist. Or maybe eating those Cheetos is affecting your biorhythms. Janice Miller from next door says that all the preservatives in fast food can make you very sick and hold on to the weight, which is why I've started cooking you wholesome food of late to keep you substantially full. But if you keep putting all that crap into your body, all my efforts to make you healthy are completely futile. And that is the reason why your sleep is so chaotic, and why you're up and about at this crazy time of the night. I'm not interested in what Janice Miller from next door has to say about my health. It's none of her business. I'm sick of all the salads you keep thrusting on me, Nina. I'm not one of Boris's bloody bunny rabbits. I'm a carnivore that enjoys big portions, thank you very much. I'll thank you, Nina, to keep your opinions to yourself and not share what I eat with our next-door neighbour. Janice Miller from next door is a nosy old cow. Her family is so lean because she denies them all the good stuff in life. I feel sorry for those kids of hers. They look like they could do with a hearty meal for once in their lives. If you must know, my sleep disturbances have nothing to do with my eating habits whatsoever. I was sure I heard something out here in the yard tonight, and those owl hoots were certainly disturbing to me. They didn't sound natural. Lewis, you're imagining things that aren't even there. Now come to bed, will you? Simon and James sighed with relief when the red front door finally closed behind the Van Rensburgs, and the lights to the house went out. Now was the time to break free from the Van Rensburg backyard, and allow the tall, lofty shadows of the trees to indulge their most urgent needs, which was to hide Simon and James from any prying eyes. The great thing about the night was that many iniquities could be covered over, like the fresh paint applied to a rusty wall, and no one would be any the wiser of what secrets the night had hidden in its grasp, for in the morning the woods would look innocently benign, and nothing would betray the lost secrets from the night before. As far as Simon was concerned, they had the 2 rabbits they had come for, so getting back home would be a walk in the park, now that they were finally away from the Van Rensburg house and the obtrusive wanderings of Mr. Van Rensburg's intensely annoying torch. Once Simon and James had reached the woodland path, their fast breathing slowed down substantially, and their racing hearts subsided. Their youthful bodies, tight with anguished trepidation, were beginning to loosen up substantially from the sheer relief of having accomplished their goals. All they needed to do now was to get back to the house as clandestinely as they could, and make sure they did their level best to ensure that their parents were not awakened from their sleep. It had been a challenge slipping out of the half-open window in the living room, but the 2 boys were still small enough to wiggle through the frame. But in a couple of years such a feat would likely be close to impossible for them to accomplish. It would seem as they ambled down the woodland trail, that was liberally scattered with leaves and twigs, every noise their boots made as they crunched the leaf litter beneath them seemed annoyingly conspicuous, as if the woods themselves were vindictively betraying their very presence. James stopped short in his tracks, his face draining of all its colour. "Something is following us," he whispered. "Listen!" "Nothing is following us, you silly mutt," said Simon, unable to hide the notable irritation in his voice, for his brother James this evening had been more than a little annoying, going on and on about the fact that he believed something was watching them, and that they were being surreptitiously followed. Why didn't his brother just hold his tongue until they got home? Simon really didn't need James to press his anxiety buttons, which was exactly what he was doing right now. All of a sudden James stood still, waving his hand, gesturing for his brother to be quiet. Both of the Miller boys stopped walking and listened to the sounds of this fetching woodland oasis that tonight was wearing a dark gown that seemed menacingly foreboding, for the canopy of trees above their heads had swallowed the scant moonlight in one hungry gulp, so any leaked prisms of light were unable to willingly trespass through the trees. so everything was cloaked in a tenebrothic fog of darkness. Indeed, the lack of light was so bad that if the Miller boys had switched off their torches, they would not have seen their hands before their faces. Luckily, their torches were magnanimously bright in their illumination, so they were able to cautiously steal their way through the trees, like two ghostly shadows. But regrettably, the overwhelming sense that someone was closing in on them from behind had become almost insufferable for James. He had to say something, even though his brother Simon would not thank him for expressing any of his insecurities he was currently feeling. "Someone is following us," he told Simon, once again stopping short in his tracks, looking nervously behind him. I know they are. I feel it in my gut, I really do. I heard a twig snapping from behind us. Surely you heard it, Simon. Don't tell me you didn't. It was loud. It means someone is definitely there, that we're not alone. It's freaking me the hell out. I'm scared, Simon. I really am. Don't overreact, James. You always hear twigs snapping in the woods. It's pretty normal. Of course we're not alone. There are wild animals roaming around everywhere, even though you can't see them. It's dark in here. They're hiding in the shadows. You could possibly have heard a raccoon or a deer, and they're harmless, so it's no big deal. Get a grip, James, will you? Stop being such a scaredy cat and putting weird ideas into my head while we're trying to get home. James certainly didn't appreciate his brother's condescending insults. That always made him feel as if he was a big baby, and he hated people thinking this way about him, for it was demeaning. As being the youngest member of the Miller family, he always felt as if he was being patronised. As they neared their own house, the woods were flooded with a cacophony of owl hoots, and what was strange about these sounds is that although they did sound like owls, the calls were far too close together, and appeared to come from different parts of the woods. So they gave James the chills. He had heard Mr. van Rensburg saying that owl hoots didn't appear normal, and he said it was like some kind of code, almost as if the owl calls around the woods were being answered and sent out, as if their calls did not actually come from owls. But then who was making them? All of a sudden both boys heard the crunch of twigs, and could sense something was moving closer towards them. And this time both the boys knew unequivocally that they were not alone. This was not their imagination teasing them mischievously. Something was definitely there, and whatever it was, the presence seemed sizable, even though the boys could not see a thing. In the darkness they heard someone clearing their throat, and at this point Simon was convinced that Mr. Rensburg had left his house and followed them through the woods. But he was so overweight, so desperately unfit, so enormous. How could he have possibly caught up with them so quickly? Why couldn't they hear him gasping and wheezing for breath? Now they were sure Mr. van Rensburg was standing there, watching them. Both boys realised to their horror that the larger-than-life man had caught them red-handed, stealing 2 of Boris's bunny rabbits. They had been cornered, so now they'd be forced to have to confess their sins to the man who would doubtlessly derive great pleasure from their humiliation, and they would have to return home with their tails shamefully tucked between their legs, admitting to their mother what they had done. Doubtlessly Janice Miller would be mad with the both of them, but their father would likely leave all the reprimanding to his wife, which was a dreadful pity, as Janice Miller could be fearsome at the very best of times. Simon was wondering what he would say to Mr. van Rensburg to explain their sneaky actions tonight, which doubtlessly would not amuse the man one little bit. As, let's just say, Louis van Rensburg was cantankerous and had about as much humour as an Australian duck-billed platypus. "We were just playing a trick on Boris, that's all," he thought he would say. "It was just a harmless prank. We wanted to give him a shock when he found his rabbits were missing, 2 of them, I mean. Then we'd have given them back to him." Simon wasn't sure that Mr. van Rensburg would believe his tall story, but in this quintessential moment, when his nerves were so tight they were practically squeezing the oxygen out of his lung, this was the only excuse that Simon could think of in the spur of the moment that might seem remotely plausible. To be fair, Boris had played enough tricks on both Simon and James. He'd once placed a very real-looking plastic snake in their rabbit hutch, and it had scared the bejesus out of the both of them. So they were only paying him back for that stunt. "Mr. van Rensburg!" Simon called out gingerly. "Is that you, Mr. van Rensburg?" The crackling of the twigs persisted, and then a branch of a tree close to them snapped, falling very suddenly to the ground. They heard a series of owl hoots, one so close it seemed like only a foot away. Then they saw him, standing tall and proud behind the tree, the enormous outline of a human-like silhouette that seemed disproportionately tall and lofty, but appeared ambiguously vague. But in the dingy darkness, Simon was certain that Mr. Rensburg was standing there. "I'm so sorry, Mr. van Rensburg. We didn't mean to do this. We were playing a trick on Boris, that's all. We were going to put the rabbits back, I promise you. It's just Mr. van Rensburg, Boris, well, he did a really horrible prank on us, and that scared us to death, so we're only getting him back for it. He put a realistic plastic snake into our hutch. We thought it was real. And we're just getting him back. It's just a prank, that's all." As he said that, the light of his torch washed over the figure standing behind the tree. Why wasn't Mr. van Rensburg's booming voice screaming out at them in indignation? His booming, outraged voice would be a whole lot more comforting than the suffocating silence that was cloaking them with a sense of unabating disquiet. Simon flinched in terror as he observed the figure that stood there. It was so gargantuan in size. And then he realized in horror that this was not Mr. van Rensburg standing there, but an imposing Bigfoot who could have been 9 foot tall. He let out a strangled scream, for the burgeoning fear within him had tipped the scales. For suddenly he was certain that he and his brother were in mortal danger, for the Bigfoot was so desperately intimidating. In a trice the Bigfoot vanished from their sight, and the woods were flooded with owl calls coming from everywhere, and that was when both boys knew the Bigfoot they had seen might be calling out to other members of his clan. What if he was calling for reinforcements, and they would be surrounded by several intimidating Bigfoot who might wish to harm them? The thought was so horrifying to both of the boys that, gripped by a horrendous fear, they ran back to the house as fast as they could, with legs made of jelly and hearts pounding violently in their chests. When the Miller boys finally reached their house, they scrambled hurriedly through the window, leaving a trail of muddy prints on the window ledge. They decided to leave the 2 abducted rabbits outside the window in the cat container and would deal with them in the morning, for both boys were too affrighted to dare venture out in this dark night, in case the Bigfoot was still out there. Worse still, there may be many more of these creatures wandering around, if those owl hoots were anything to go by. "Did you see it?" said James. "Did you see it? It was a Bigfoot." "Of course I saw it," said Simon. "Didn't I tell you something was watching us, but you didn't believe me, did you, Simon? You always think it's my imagination, don't you? It turns out I was absolutely right. That Bigfoot was stalking us. The size of him! I've never seen anything so big in my entire life. There's no way I'm going out there until the morning to put those rabbits into the guinea pig enclosure. I'm sure they'll be fine, unless the Bigfoot steals them and eats them. And if he does, well, it's just too bad." "Maybe he could smell the rabbits and was hungry," said Simon. "Maybe that's why he was following us." So there we are. That is the end of part 2 of our story. Part 3 is tomorrow night, and I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.